Testing trading strategies with this expert advisor over a long period of time using multiple symbols has never been easier. Simply specify the indicator you want to use and voila, you have a working expert advisor. What if you want to use different indicators? Okay, just put them in and test away. It's as easy as that. Well, sort of. Now, this is no get out of coding free card, and you will need to learn how to code expert advisors. And well, that is why I'm here, because today I'm going to show you exactly how to code up your very own expert advisor, but most importantly, your very own indicator library, so that way you can test any combination of indicators within your trading strategies as you like. Now, this is, in my opinion, the best expert advisor that you can find on Trading Guru YouTube. Now, this is not only because this is something that I have created myself, at least I came up with the idea independently, but I'm sure this is something that has been done before. But the reasons why I think this is so good is that there is so many benefits. Now, the first benefit is, of course, you can code any combination of trading indicators as you like, which of course we have demonstrated in the introduction. The second benefit, however, which is most importantly, I think the best benefit, is that you no longer have to code your indicators directly within your expert advisors. You code them all within a trading library. So gone are the days that you have to code up your indicators within your expert advisors and scrounge around some of your old files to find the indicator code that you have created in the past. It's all done in one location, in one indicator library. There is a third benefit, which is data mining. However, this is something that I am going to go through in a follow-up video, so make sure you keep an eye out on that. Now, I just want to mention that everything that I'm going to be sharing today is available on my GitHub, and I'll need you to go over there because we are going to be using template files for our expert advisor and our indicator library to give us a little bit of a head start in our coding. You'll also find in the library the completed code for today's expert advisor, and also some additional bonuses too, so make sure you do head over there. Now, I beg, if you do want to take coding seriously, then I do recommend following along in this tutorial and not simply going over to my GitHub to get the completed file. You'll be able to learn how to do all of this yourself, add in your own indicators to your indicator library, make the appropriate changes in your expert advisors, so that way you can make this expert advisor and this library your own. And of course, most importantly, you also help with my watch time, so that's an added bonus for me, so thank you. So that's enough talking. Let's go into the code now and start creating, well, our expert advisor. With MetaTrader open, we're going to go to File, New File, Expert Advisor Template. We're going to name our expert advisor. I'm going to call it Multi-Symbol Indicator EA, version 1.01. Next, next, finished. And this is our expert advisor. Now, available on my GitHub is a template file which we are going to be using to start off our expert advisor code, and I'm going to copy that from my GitHub and paste it into this file. So by removing all of the code and pasting, this now creates our expert advisor using the template available from our GitHub. So to go through the code, we just have some commentary at the top. We have version 1 notes, and this file is going to be using multi-symbol functionality. Available on my YouTube channel, there is a multi-symbol expert advisor tutorial on how to code up your very own advanced expert advisors. Now, this is going to be using the same multi-symbol functionality from that tutorial, so I'm not going to go through today how to code that one up. So if you do want to know a little bit more detail in terms of how to code up your own multi-symbol expert advisor, I do recommend watching that video. This EA will also incorporate trigger and filter indicators, which we'll be going through in this video. And the indicators are going to be taking signals from our indicator library, which we're going to be coding up today. Just to highlight here that patch 1 at the moment is using our template file, which again is available on my GitHub. Once we complete this tutorial, we are going to have our full expert advisor using the indicator library, and we'll be updating this to patch number 2. Now, this full code is going to be available on my GitHub, so that way, if you are following along, you can verify your code to make sure that you are getting similar results to the finished code available on my GitHub. Just to highlight here for this particular expert advisor's strategy conditions, we are looking for long and short trades. We have 1 entry trigger, 2 filter options, and 1 exit trigger. Just to note here that we are using fixed position size and no stop loss. So it is quite basic money management, as we are going to be taking exits on the exit trigger only. If you do want to be adding in some more advanced money management, then I do recommend watching some of my other tutorials as they go through in a bit more detail in terms of how to add in more money management techniques. We have here just some copyright and version properties. And now going into the Expert Advisor section itself. The first section is going to be Expert Advisor Setup. We've got a comment here for libraries, which we will be adding in our indicator library throughout this tutorial. At the moment, it is just blank. We've got our include functions to ensure that we can process trades, as well as our magic number. Now this is where we're specifying multi-symbol EA functionality. Just one thing to call out is that I have made some slight changes to the multi-symbol functionality from my previous tutorial to make it simpler for the end user. We now are declaring all tradable symbols as an input function so that way the user can specify the tradable symbols that they want to be using. One thing to call out here is that if the user specifies current within the input of MetaTrader, then that will trade the current symbol that is selected on the Expert Advisor's Market Watch. We have, similar to our last tutorial, core arrays, some variables, and here just specifying the lot size, which again is an input function that the user can change, but it still is a fixed lot size risk management. We have our indicators setup section, which we'll be coding throughout this video. And now we get into the Expert Advisor initialization functions. We have here our initialization of C-Trade, which I've created this now as a function, where in my previous video, we actually had all of the functionality within the onInit function. Just makes things a little bit more cleaner. We have our initialization of our multi-symbol EA, and then our resize of core arrays. We're going to be adding to the onInit function as we go on throughout this video. We have our onDinit function, which at the moment nothing is included, but we will be adding to it. And now the onTick function. This is very similar to our multi-symbol EA, where we've got some commentary. We've got our multi-symbol EA for loop. We're getting our current symbol. We're processing if there is a new candle, and this is slightly different to our last video, but it functions exactly the same. And then if there is a new candle, we are now processing trades. One thing that I've added in here, which is different to my last tutorial, is I have added in a position direction function, so that way we can track what position direction we are in. Now this becomes important when we are exiting trades, or even if we are adjusting trades, for example, a trailing stop loss, not within the scope of this tutorial, but the option is there if you want to add it in future. We got sections here for our indicator signals, our entry longs, entry shorts, and exit trades, which will of course be coding up in this video. And then we've got our symbol metrics loop, again, very similar to our last tutorial. And then we end with some commentary at the end of our onTick function. We now come to the custom functions section, starting off with the multi-symbol custom functions. Again, very similar to what we've done in our last tutorial, however, with slight changes. Firstly, moving the multi-symbol functionality to a custom functions section just to make things cleaner above. As mentioned, if all tradable symbols is equal to current specified by the user, then we are going to be using the current symbol that is within the market watch. Else, if it isn't current, then we are going to be trading all tradable symbols, which is delimited by this pipe symbol. Again, won't spend too much time on this as I've gone through this in a lot of detail in my previous videos. The final thing is we are going to be resizing core arrays to the number of tradable symbols in the trading strategy. There is another custom function section for our indicators library, which we'll be coding up in this video. And then finally, we have a custom function section for process trades. We've got our initialization of our Expert Advisor to take trades using the trade library. We've got the appropriate calculations for entering trades, which again, very similar to what we have coded up in our previous videos. And finally, we have a process trades close for when we want to exit the trades. I'm going to compile. Everything compiles with no errors. That means I've copied everything over appropriately. So we're ready to move on to the next stage. So now our Expert Advisor has been created using the template file available on my GitHub. Now, of course, we can start creating our indicator library. And I just want to mention that we are also using a template file available on my GitHub. So let's go in and code up our indicator library. Now that we're back into MetaEditor, what we're going to do now is create our indicator library by going to File, New, and instead of selecting Expert Advisor, we are going to be selecting Library. So with Library selected, I'm going to go Next. I'm going to call our indicator library, indicator library, and finish. And this creates our indicator library. So now I'm going to be setting up our indicator library by copying across the indicator template file, which is also available on my GitHub. So this does give us a little bit of a head start, so you don't have to code up everything from scratch. So with everything highlighted, I'm going to remove that and paste in the code from our GitHub. So with everything pasted, again, I'm going to quickly go through our template files so that way we can get up to speed and then we can start having some fun. So again, we got some commentary. Version 1, this file contains our indicator list for triggers such as entries and exit triggers, filters, and also a get indicator value, which I'll briefly mention in this tutorial at the end. However, it's not going to be in our scope for this particular video. We've also got patch notes. So patch note version 1, this is our template file. And again, once we complete this file, we will be updating this to version 2, which will be available on my GitHub. We also have a note section so that way we can clearly illustrate what this file does and noting the particular structure of this file. We've got a structure, a legend, and just an example, which will be populating. And then we also have the library contents. Now, because this is going to be our indicator library, all of our indicators will be coded up within this particular library and then referenced back to the expert advisor that we're going to be coding up. Because we are eventually going to be coding up a lot of indicators within this library, what I've done is put in sections so that way when we are coding up indicators, we can code them up to the appropriate section which best fits that particular indicator. We have trend following indicators, momentum indicators, volatility indicators, oscillators, price action indicators, and then other types of indicators as well. We've got, of course, the library properties. And then we get into our custom functions within this particular library. Now, of course, when we are creating indicators, the very first thing we need to do is initialize the indicator, and that is done through creating a indicator handle. Now we are creating our first custom function within this library, which is called getIndicatorHandle. Now we need to specify a few variables into this particular function. Firstly is the indicator string, and that is going to specify what indicator we are using and what parameters we are using, which will become very clear throughout this tutorial. We also want to call the current symbol that is being traded, and again, that current symbol is going to be fed through from our expert advisor into this custom function, and the current period that we are also trading. Now note here, when we are using a library for any functions that we want to export, we must call out export at the end of our function that we do want to export. Now within each of our functions, again, I've put in some commentary. All of the functions follow the same commentary where we have a setup. We want to check for NA indicators, which I'll go through in a moment. Then we have all of our different types of indicators specified, similar to what has been mentioned up the top. And then we've got some error handling, and then we've got a return 0 at the bottom, and that is going to return 0 if there are any errors within our code. Now we'll be, of course, adding to this as we go along, so we can move on to our next function. So now with our particular indicator handles set up, we can now get the indicator trigger signals, and that is done by getting indicator trigger. Again, similar to before, within this function, we need to declare the variable of indicator. What we've added in here is passing through the indicator handle itself. And similar to before, we've got the current symbol and then the current period being passed through. Again, because we're going to be using this indicator within our expert advisor, we have called out export. And we've got similar functionality to before, where we've got some commentary, and then at the end, we are returning error. Again, we've got this as part of our error handling section. And note that we are returning the string error rather than before we were returning the integer 0. And that is because this particular function returns a string variable. Now moving on to our next function, we are going to be getting in the indicator filter conditions. So of course, our indicators will be either a trigger condition or a filter condition. So we need to specify which function we want to be using for our particular indicator, depending on our expert advisor's functionality. So this is very similar to before. We get indicator filter. We are passing through the string indicator, the indicator handle, the current symbol, and then the current period. Of course, we're using export here. Again, similar functionality to before, where we have all of our commentary and then passing through our error handling, we are returning error. Now, finally, as mentioned, we have a final custom function, which is called getIndicatorValue, which we are not going to be using in this particular EA for today's tutorial. However, this is going to be very useful, which I'll save to the end of this tutorial as a little bit of a bonus. And we'll go through exactly how this might be useful in EAs that you might be coding up. So that concludes creating our indicator library and setting it all up by using the code in my GitHub's template file. So if I go compile and it compiles with no errors, that's good. We can move on to the next stage. So now that does complete transferring all of the template file code from my GitHub across to our indicator library and our expert advisor. So now we can actually get our hands dirty and start coding within, firstly, our indicator library. Now, the very first thing I want to touch on here is talking about the structure of this library. And it's very important that we do spend some time on the structure so that way we can code up the indicator library consistently and use it across our expert advisors consistently as well. Now, I just want to mention that this might be a little bit challenging to follow along at the start, but once we actually start coding up our indicators within our indicator library, this will make a whole lot more sense. So please bear with me and follow along in the tutorial. It'll make a whole lot more sense in just a moment. So let's go into MetaEditor, into our indicator library, and start coding up our indicator library structure. So back into our indicator library, we are going to be adding in some more structure to our expert advisor. What I'm going to do is first start off in the commentary section and really call out what structure we are actually going to be using. So I've just added in this section of code, which gives a little bit of detail on the structure. Now, it's really important that we follow the exact same structure throughout this indicator library so that way when we are passing through indicators from our expert advisor into this library, our library can read what is being passed through in the appropriate structure. So as we go through this tutorial, this will make a whole lot more sense. So bear with me if you are getting confused at the start. So the very first value that must be passed through is the specific indicator name. So for example, if we want to use a simple moving average, then the name that we're going to be utilizing is SMA. The second value is going to be a reference to the particular indicator conditions that we are going to be using. And I'll go through that in a lot more detail as we progress throughout this tutorial. Now, any values following this, so value 3 onwards, is going to be the specific indicator parameters for the particular indicator. So for example, if we want to be using a 200 simple moving average, then we would specify here the particular parameter of 200. Now finally, all values must be delimited by an underscore character, and that is how the expert advisor will be able to delineate between the different values that are being passed through above. So now within this legend section, I'm going to add in some more code. Now we are going to be creating a indicator array, which will be defined within our indicators library. And that is actually going to be storing all of our indicator values, which was called out above. So our indicator array at position 0 is going to be our value number 1, which is going to be our first value, which is, for example, SMA. Our indicator array position number 1 is going to be our indicator position, which is referred to as value number 2. And then finally, any other indicator array position, so 2 onwards, is going to be the particular parameters of our indicator, which is going to be our third value onwards. So let's go through a particular example of what all of this might look like. So here is an example of a MACD passing through, of course, the MACD value, which is again our first value. We've got the second value, which is our reference to the particular indicator conditions. And just to call out here that this is denoted by the letter A. And depending on the conditions or however many different types of indicator conditions you might have, this will refer to the particular indicator conditions that you might want to be using. I have defined this by calling out the letter A as a lookup reference for the particular indicator condition of the MACD that we'll be using. And then there might be future or alternative indicator conditions, which can be denoted as letter B, C, and so on. This will make a lot more sense when we do code up our MACD indicator. We are then passing through the first MACD parameter, which is number 12, then 26, and then 9. Of course, the number of parameters will be specific to the particular indicator that you are using, which is why all indicators are going to be slightly different in terms of the number of parameters that you are using. And notice here, as per the note above, these particular values are delimited by the underscore character. Now, when we do pass this through our indicator array, as mentioned above, our indicator array at position 0 is going to equal to the MACD indicator. So that is going to be our reference to which indicator we are using. Our indicator array position number 1 is going to be the conditions for conditions A, which is defined in our library below. And then for positions 2, 3, and 4, this refers to the particular indicator parameters, which is fast MA, slow MA, and of course our signal line. So I hope that makes a lot more sense now in terms of the particular structure that we are going to be using. So let's go into the code itself so that we can set up this particular structure within our functions within this particular indicator library. So underneath get indicator handle, underneath the setup section, I'm going to be declaring the following variables. The first variable is an integer for the handle, and that will be storing our indicator handle, which is what we are going to be passing through to our expert advisor. We've got the indicator array as called out before, which is going to be declared within this custom function. We've got the number of parameters that are going to be used for this particular indicator. And then we've got indicator details as a string variable, so that way we can pass through some commentary. Now, just so this makes a lot more sense, our string indicator variable, which is passed through from our expert advisor into this indicator library, is actually the same variable as specified above. So for example, this is the variable that needs to be specified from our expert advisor, passed through into our custom function, so that way the indicator library can read and understand which indicator we're using. So for example, if we wanted to use the MACD for condition A using the following MACD parameters, this is the indicator variable that needs to be specified in our expert advisor going into our custom functions. So this string indicator is equal to, for example, MACD letter A 12, 26, and 9. So that means with that indicator specified, we can actually store our indicator parameters within our indicator array. And that is done through this following function. We have the number of parameters equal to string split, and we are splitting the indicator variable, which is again passed through our custom function, being delimited by, in this case, the underscore, and then being stored into our indicator array. And then we are resizing our indicator array to the number of parameters called out here. And you might note that if you are following along from our multi-symbol EA, this is exactly the same functionality that we have used in the past to specify our multi-symbol functionality expert advisor. The only difference is, instead of using a pipe character, we are using an underscore. Now finally, just to make sure all of this works, we just got some print functionality. In this instance, we've got a for loop, and this for loop is going to run through all the indicator parameters, and all it's going to do is in the indicator details string that we have specified, it's going through the indicator parameters and calling out the particular indicator parameters that is going to be used for this particular indicator. Now this just makes sure that our setup above is working appropriately, that particularly the string split is storing the appropriate indicator values into our indicator array. And this of course prints out the EA will process the indicator for indicator details with the number of parameters for the particular symbol, and it specifies the current symbol that's being traded. So that creates our indicator array, and now we can specify some further code down below. I'm just going to, for simplicity, group these together, just so this section is all one section. The next section of this particular code is we're going to be checking for NA indicators. Now, there might be instances where in our particular expert advisor, this custom function might be called. However, we might not want to use the custom function. For example, maybe we don't want to use a particular indicator. However, we are still calling this particular indicator handle custom function. So if we don't want to use a particular indicator, then the expert advisor can specify an NA indicator, which again, I'll showcase when we are coding up our expert advisor once our indicator library is complete. So going back to this section here, the first thing I want to do is put in some commentary. So if we're using the NA indicator, then we want to run a if scenario where if indicator array at position 0 equals NA, and recall that indicator array at position 0 equals the first variable of the indicator that's being passed through. So if this particular string is equal to NA, then we want to pass through the following code. We want to pass through a print statement that the handle for the particular indicator, which in this instance is indicator NA, for the current symbol has been created, and the indicator handle ID is equal to handle, which is in this case going to be 0. And then finally, we just want to return 0. So this effectively will not do anything within our expert advisor. It's not going to create a handle. It's not going to enter in trades. It's not going to filter out trades. We are simply doing nothing. Now, finally, we have our error handling. So if our indicator array is not equal to NA, then it might be equal to one of these particular indicators. However, we haven't coded anything up. So then we also want to put in with our error handling an else statement. So with the else statement, again, we just want to print out that there was no handle being created for this particular indicator for the current symbol, and the error and the handle ID is equal to handle, and we are returning 0. So this is the same print function as before with some slight changes, but still we are returning 0. If I compile this, everything compiles. You might actually get some warnings, which I might actually change this now. Integer to string. If I compile that, I get no warnings, so that's a little bit better. So that's our get indicator handle setup. What we can do is do something very similar to our other functions. So what I'm going to do is copy everything except for this print results section, because we only need the print results for the indicator handle setup. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go to the get indicator trigger signal area and go to the setup section and paste in the code that we have coded up just then, as this is going to be the exact same functionality that we are going to be using for all of the custom functions within this expert advisor. We're going to do the same for our filters section. And just for now, we're going to leave our get indicator values as this is slightly different. Now back into our setup indicator handle, we're going to go to our check for NA indicators, and we're going to copy this following code, and going to our setup indicator trigger signals underneath check for NA indicators, we're going to paste in the code. Now again, we don't need the print function, so we're going to be removing that. And in this case, we are not returning 0 because we are returning a string. So instead of returning 0, we're going to be returning NA. All this does is check that if the indicator array at position 0 is equal to NA, we're going to be returning NA. else it might equal some other functions within this particular indicator section. However, since we don't have anything else specified, we need to code up our error handling to have a else statement, and that will be returning error. And finally, just some commentary where if the indicator array at position 0 is not found, then we are going to be returning 0. So what I'm going to do is copy the code that we have just made for NA indicators. I'm going to go to the indicator filters section, and I have mistakenly missed our NA indicators section. Apologies, but I will be adding that here. Let me just get the code for check for NA indicators. I'll make sure that is within our template file. And then finally, for our error handling, I'm going to copy this and go to our error handling section and just remove this and replace it with the following code. And again, at the moment, no changes to our get indicator value. So if I compile this, everything should compile with no issues at all. So now that is our indicator library structure set up, why don't we add in an indicator? And the first indicator we're going to add in is the infamous MACD indicator. And this is going to be our main trigger confirmation indicator for us to enter in trades. So let's go into MetaEditor and code up our very first indicator, which is our MACD. So this is exciting because now we can actually code up our very first indicator, which is our MACD. And so going into our commentary section over here, going into our library contents itself, our MACD indicator is in fact a oscillating indicator. So what I'm going to do is add in the MACD underneath oscillators, which is as follows. Again, similar to our example above, our very first value is going to be our MACD, followed by an underscore. We're going to be passing through, for example, condition A, again, another underscore. Then we have our fast value, underscore, followed by slow value, underscore, followed by our signal value. And again, we're going to be, for this instance, specifying that we're going to be using it as a trigger. And for this instance, we only have one indicator condition, which is indicator condition A. So every time that we are creating a new indicator, it's good practice to be specifying in the library contents commentary what indicators you are creating, what type of indicator it is, if it's a trigger, filter, or it could be both, and what particular conditions you might have. For example, we are using conditions A, which there isn't enough room to actually call out what indicator A conditions are. We're going to save that for the code down the bottom. So as you code up more indicators within this particular library, you'll be filling up this indicator library content, so that way you can refer to the library contents if you want to refer to a particular indicator in this library in future. So with that done, the very first thing we need to do, of course, is set up the handles for our particular indicator, which is going to be done through our setup indicator handles section. So with our indicator setup completed, we have checked for NA indicators. We can now actually specify an indicator, which is going to be our oscillating MACD. So for all of our indicators and how this library is going to work, it's going to follow the same structure as above, where the very first thing we're going to do is check what indicator we are using. So if indicator array at position 0 is equal to NA, then we're going to run this function. However, in this particular case, what we want to do is run if the indicator array at position 0 is equal to MACD, then run this particular function in here. And this is going to be exactly the same as how you would set up any other MACD indicator. The first thing you want to do is get the indicator handle, and this is done through iMACD. We are passing through the current symbol, the current period, and we are passing through indicator array at position 2 wrapped in a string to integer variable. And this is important because we need to convert the string, which is passed through our indicator variable, into an integer. And remember, indicator array at position 2 is the same as this parameter here, which is our fast parameter, which is again the same as this example above, which is going to be referring to this value. And for example, this value might be equal to 12 if that is what the expert advisor is passing through. And again, we've got at position 3, the slow MACD, and then we've got at position 4, the signal line. So again, going back to our MACD handle, we're passing through what this is in position number 2 of the indicator array. This is the fast MACD line. We've got here the slow MACD line. And then finally, we've got here the signal line. And then finally, we've got price close. Now, of course, all indicators will have their own indicator handle function, and some might actually be an iCustom function that you might use. So of course, this is going to change depending on the indicator that you are using. However, they all follow the exact same structure. Now, if you followed my previous tutorial, you'll know that I like to put in some error handling. If for whatever reason we get an error, then it's going to print out the following code. Now, I won't go through this in a lot of detail. I'll let you pause and code this up yourself, so that way you've got your own error handling. And then finally, what we want to do is return the particular indicator handle back to the expert advisor. And so we're going to be returning handle, which is going to be this value over here. So now that is the MACD coded up, and just to call out here that any other time you want to create your own handle, and we're going to be creating one more, it is still going to follow this exact same structure. The only difference is the handle itself. So handle equal to whatever this is over here is going to change depending on what indicator you are using. And then of course, this over here is going to change depending on the indicator you are using. However, everything else is actually exactly the same, and that is what is really good about this code because it follows this same structure. So with our MACD handle set up, the next thing we need to do is actually code up our MACD conditions, and that is done in our trigger conditions because we are using the MACD as a trigger. So under setup indicator trigger signals, we want to be going to our oscillators indicators, going to space that out. And so we're going to be utilizing the following. So again, for the MACD indicator, we're going to be calling a if statement. If indicator array at position 0 is equal to MACD, then we're going to pass through the following functions. Now I've just called out here because we are using indicator conditions as denoted by letter A. The following conditions is what we're going to be coding up in this particular indicator. So we're going to be looking for MACD trigger signals for conditions A. When the MACD and the signal lines has a crossover, we are going to be also looking for the crossover occurring below the 0 lines, and that is going to be our long condition. Alternatively, if the MACD and the signal line has a cross under and the cross occurs above the 0 line, then that's when we are going to be going short. Again, a very popular MACD crossover strategy, which we are going to be testing today. So with that specified, we can actually call out the following code. Again, this is very similar to how we would code up any other indicator, particularly, of course, the MACD. We're going to be creating a buffer for our MACD and a buffer for our signal line. We're going to be filling our MACD and our signal line using the coffee buffer function. And just to note here that we are going to be copying for 3 candles so that way we can get the prior candle, the current candle, and then the new candle that is yet to be confirmed, because we are going to be checking for the crossover against the prior candle and the current candle, which is why we need 3 candles total. So that means our fill MACD is going to be equal to passing through the copy buffer function, our indicator handle, which is passed through our function over here, indicator handle. We're going to be passing through 3 candles total, and we're going to be storing that into buffer MACD, of course, specified above. We then put in some error handling. So if whatever reason there is an error, then we're going to be returning a fill error back to the expert advisor. Now, if there is no errors, then we can put in the following code. And these are variables to get the particular crossover of the MACD line and the signal line. Again, we're going to be passing through the MACD line and the signal line, and we require the prior and the current candles. So we have a total of 4 different variables that we need to pass through: the current MACD, the current signal, the prior MACD, and then the prior signal, which is from the appropriate buffer that is called out over here, and the buffer position. And just to call out, we are normalizing this to 10 decimal places because I've found that normalizing it to lower decimal places might get errors, particularly in Forex. Now, with all of our variables defined, we can then put in our particular indicator conditions. So I've just added in the following code, and the very first part of this code is if indicator array at position 1 equals to A. Now recall that this indicator position at position 1 is the particular conditions that we are using, referring back to our example and our library structure. Indicator array at position number 1 is containing the particular indicator conditions that we want to be using, denoted by what I have denoted it as the letter A. Now you might have alternative MACD conditions, which we are going to be coding up one in this tutorial, which can be denoted as indicator conditions B. So going back to our code, if indicator array at position number 1 is equal to condition A, then we're going to be passing through the following functions. Else, if there is an error, for example, if we don't find any conditions to refer to, if there might be a mistake from the user passing through the wrong conditions and one was not found, for example, then we're going to pass through the following error. So let's code up our indicator conditions A. And just to call out here that I've put in the comment above, just again to help us code up this particular indicator conditions A. So the very first example is if there is a long crossover where the prior MACD is below the prior signal, and then now in the current candle, the current MACD is now greater than the current signal, as well as the current MACD and the current signal are below the 0 line. For example, the crossover has occurred below the 0 line, then we want to be going long. Of course, we have opposite conditions where, of course, we'll be looking for shorts where the prior MACD is greater than the signal line, and now the current MACD is less than the signal line, as well as the crossover has occurred above the 0 line, then we want to be going short. Now, of course, there's going to be instances where this is not the case, so then we want to be returning no trade. And that now completes our code for our MACD indicator for conditions A. If I compile this, I get no errors. Again, I do get some warnings, however, which if I clicked on one, and that is a warning just that when we are converting strings to integers, there might be some data loss because of the conversion. However, we can't do anything about that because we are converting strings to integers. It's okay, it's just warnings, nothing to really worry about here. Now that is our first indicator coded up, and our first one is always the hardest, but trust me, it gets easier the more you do it, so why not do another one? And that is going to be our exponential moving average. Now for this particular trading strategy, we are going to be using the exponential moving average as a filter indicator, so we want to be only taking trades when the trend is in our favor. The second thing is we are also going to be using this indicator as an exit indicator. So this is going to be exiting trades on the trigger when the trend has ended. So that is our exponential moving average, somewhat explained. So let's code that up within our indicator library. So back within our indicator library, this is the last indicator we're going to be coding up, and that is going to be our exponential moving average. Now in our library content section, our exponential moving average is of course a trend following indicator. So I'm going to be adding in the following code, and this is how the EMA is going to be coded up. Very simple, a lot simpler than our MACD. That our first variable is going to be our EMA, followed by the conditions A, and then followed by the period. We have no other indicator parameters to follow that, quite simple. We are using our indicator as a trigger and also as a filter. Now the trigger is going to be used when exiting out of a trade, which is going to be the crossover of price and the EMA line. However, we're also going to be using this as a filter. So when we have a MACD trigger, we're going to be referring to our EMA as a filter to see if price is either above or below the exponential moving average. And that is going to determine whether we also want to take long or short trades, which is going to be denoted by, again, conditions A. So likewise, we're going to go and set up our indicator handle by going to our setup indicator handle section. And this is going to be very similar to what we have done before. If you want a little bit of a head start, if you are following along the code and you don't want to cheat and go to my GitHub, you can actually copy this MACD handle that we have created, go to trend following, paste that in, change this to EMA, change this to EMA as well. And our handle setup is actually going to be different. I'm going to delete all of this. And I'm going to put in our indicator handle function, which is as follows. Now, if I compile this, everything compiles, looks like no errors were done by doing this, and see how quick and easy it is to create another indicator handle using this particular code. All the error handling and the print functions is exactly the same as before, and all of it refers to variables which is within the particular print function, so you don't actually have to worry about changing the print functions within this particular code. So it's nice and simple. Again, you just need to add in your own indicator handle. So to go through this handle, we're using the IMA function. We've got the current symbol, the current period, again, integer to string, and we are going to be passing through indicator array at position 2, which is our period for our particular moving average. We've got zero shift. We're using the mode as EMA, and we're using price close for this example. So now we can go to creating our indicator conditions. The first condition we're going to create is our indicator triggers, and that is going to be for our exit in this example. But if you want to use this as an entry as well, similar to a no-nonsense Forex baseline cross, then you can use that, of course. So going to our trend following indicator section, I've created some space and I've pasted in the following code. So this is going to look for moving average indicator triggers. Where price crosses above the moving average, that is going to be a long condition. Else, if price crosses below the moving average, that is going to be a short condition, and that is for condition A. Now I've called out here, we've got indicator array at position 0 is equal to EMA. One thing I want to call out here is that this is the same conditions for all types of moving averages, whether using a exponential moving average, a simple moving average, or a weighted moving average, or the like. So you can, instead of coding up indicator conditions for each different type of moving average, you can actually put in an OR function and specify if indicator array is equal to SMA, for example, then this code will still function exactly the same. The only thing you need to do is create, of course, your indicator handle for the simple moving average. So that is just a little bit of a hint. Again, this is exactly the same code or similar code as above. So if you do want to copy the MACD and paste in here, of course, making some changes, then by all means you can do so, or you can code this up yourself. Notice here, that's where the MACD buffer is. Very similar. We're just calling this MA buffer, and note that we only need one buffer because the MA is just, well, the MA line, and we are going to be getting price through a separate variable. We're going to be using the copy buffer function to fill the moving average again to 3 candles because we need to get the crossover. So we're getting the prior candle, current candle, and new candle. We've created this variable called fill MA. Using the copy buffer function, we're using the indicator handle as specified in the get indicator trigger function itself for 3 candles, and we're copying it to the buffer MA. Again, we're going to be using some error handling, same error handling that we have used before. We then want to specify the following, again, similar to the MACD. However, instead of using 2 indicator parameters, we're using 1, but we are using price as well. We need to have 4 variables to check for a crossover. So we're checking for current MA, current price, the prior MA, and then the prior price. Again, normalized to 10 decimal places. And for price, we are getting the I close for the current symbol on the current period, 1 candle prior. And for the prior price, we're getting the I candle close for the current symbol, the current period, and 2 candles prior. And just for you to note here, the commentary. And again, with that created, we now have all the variables defined. We can now specify our indicator conditions. So similar to before, for this particular indicator for conditions A, we're looking for prices closing above the moving average. That's going to be a long trade, or price closing below the moving average. That's going to be a short trade. And again, that is crossovers. So we are looking for indicator array at position 1 equal to the letter A. And if that's true, then we're going to create these conditions. Else, for whatever reason, if the indicator array at position 1 does not equal to, well, the letter A, and it equals to some other variable, then no indicator reference conditions were found. So we're going to be returning an error. So we can code up our conditions. So if the prior price is less than the MA and now the current price is greater than the MA, then that is a long crossover. So we're looking for longs. Else, if the prior price is greater than the prior MA and now the current price is less than the current MA, then that's a short trade. Else, if none of these conditions are true, then there is no trades. I can compile this. Compiles, and look at that, no errors. So now what I'm going to do is actually a bit of a hack, because we are going to be using very similar code to code up our moving average, not as a trigger, but as a filter. So I'm going to copy the code that I've just highlighted, or that we've just created. I'm going to copy this and then go to our indicators, filters, signals section, again under trend following. I'm going to paste the exact same code. Now, of course, we don't want to be using the exact same conditions. We want to be using them slightly different, because this is now filters and not triggers. So I'm just going to change the condition commentary for condition A to the following, where instead of looking for a crossover, simply we are looking for price above the moving average. That means we're in a long trend. Or if price is below the moving average, then we're in a short trend. Again, we're using indicator at position 0 equals to MA. Our buffer MA is the exact same. Our fill MA, however, is going to be slightly different, because we're just looking for whether price is above the MA. We don't need the prior candle, current candle, or new candle. All we're going to be doing is filling our buffer with the new candle and then the current candle. So our prior candle can be removed. You can change this to 2 and change this to 2, and that is done. Our error handling stays the same. Our conditions here are slightly different, where now we don't need the prior MA and the prior price. That can be removed. So now we're only looking at the current MA and then the current price. Again, this is changed. So what I'm going to do is copy the code from above, paste that into here. So price is above the moving average, that's a long trade, or price is below the moving average, that's a short trade. Now this is all relatively the same. However, we're removing the prior price and prior MA conditions from these codes. So now for conditions A, if the current price is greater than the current MA, then that's a long trade. Else, if the current price is less than the current MA, then that's a short trade. Else, if none of these conditions are true for whatever reason, for example, if the current price is equal to exactly the current MA, well, then that is no trade. And again, the error handling stays the same. We compile, and that compiles. So now that is our indicator library completed. We have our first indicators coded up within our library. So what we can do is now go into our Expert Advisor and reference to the library we have just created. So that way our Expert Advisor can set up the indicators, can also get the indicator signals for both triggers and filters. So let's go into our meta editor, into our expert advisor, and code in our indicator library. So now we are back into our actual expert advisor. Now that we are finished, well, mostly finished our indicator library, we can actually call our indicator library functions to get our particular indicator signals. So back into our indicator expert advisor, we're going to go to the expert setup section, and we are going to be importing our indicator library. The way we do that is by doing the following code, #import, and we need to end it by #import. And then what we need to do is call the particular library that we are using. So going back to our indicator library section, I'm going to copy our indicator library.mq5. And note, this should be the same as what we have called out here, indicator library.mq5. If you do have a different name, then you should be changing this name over here, just so it's consistent. And then over here, we're going to be in quotation marks calling our indicator library. Now, one thing that you need to do is change the .mq5 to .ex5. And that just refers to the actual compiled indicator library. So now with that done, we need to specify the actual functions that we are going to be importing. And this is fairly easy to do because back into our indicator library, we can copy these codes, everything except for the export, and paste that within our indicator library section. So we've got int get indicator handle is equal to the string indicator, string current symbol, and then the enum time frames the current period. Going to our next piece of code, I'm going to copy this, paste this. I've copied over the export, so remove that, replace that. And again, that's our get indicator triggers function. And finally, get indicator filters. That goes in there. Remove the export, change that to that. Then I know we're not using it, but I might as well do it now. Get indicator value, copy that, paste that, might be needed for the future. Compile, that does compile. Now note here is if you do get one of these wrong when you do compile, you might not get an error message because the compiler will not know if this reference is actually correct until you actually run the expert advisor itself within MetaTrader. So make sure that you do copy across these properly, as well as the different parameters called out within the function as well. They all need to be the same. Now, this is where we get to the fun part. Well, all of this is fun. Well, to me it is anyway. And if you're following along, probably to you too. So the extra fun part. And that is the indicator setup section. Now this is where we're going to define the different indicators that we are going to be using, as well as the parameters for those indicators. Now, just to recap, the strategy conditions is going to be using 1 trigger, 2 filters, and 1 exit trigger. Now, all of this can be changed and altered if you are following along, so that way you can increase, decrease, or change whatever you want in terms of the amount of indicators that you are using, so that way you can really create your own expert advisor with your own combinations of indicators to suit the needs of your particular trading strategy. So back into our indicator section over here. Again, we're using 4 indicators, so I've just created 4 different comments. We've got our entry 1 variables, and that's our entry trigger. We've got our indicator filters for filter 1, indicator filters for filter 2, and then our exit variables for exit number 1. So underneath each of our indicators, I've included the following variables, and these variables are of course consistent across all of our indicators. The first variable is going to be a input string variable, which is called indicator E1 for indicator entry 1. And I'll specify what that is going to be in just a moment. We then have a string variable, which is called indicator signal E1. And then we've got a indicator handle E1, which is going to store our indicator handles for our symbols within this array. And of course, they're the same across each of the indicators, which are just differentiated by different names. For example, this is our filter 1, this is our filter 2, and this is our exit 1. Now, the intent of the input string here for indicator E1 is this is going to store our indicator variable that the user wants to specify, which is what is going to be referenced to our indicator library. So for this particular expert advisor, for our entry trigger, we want to be using our MACD. So what I'm going to do is go into our indicator library. I'm going to go down to our library contents. And under our library contents, we have, of course, specified our MACD indicator conditions. And of course, this is coded as a trigger, and we've got 8 conditions for now. So what I'm going to do is copy this code and come back to our expert advisor and paste this and close it off. Now, of course, this is a string variable, so I need to put it in quotation marks. And that now initializes our indicator E1, which will be referring to our indicator library for MACD. Now, of course, we don't want to refer fast, slow, and signal as the names. We actually need to specify the parameters that we want to be using. So we're just going to be starting off with the default parameters of 12, 26, and 9. The beauty of this, of course, is because this is an input function in MetaTrader itself, the user can actually change the parameters within the expert advisor and not have to come back to the code. Now we're going to do the same thing for our filter 1. Going back to our indicator library, we're using our EMA period as the filter, so I'm copying that, pasting that, adding the semicolon, and then putting in quotation marks. And then finally, we're going to be using a 200 period exponential moving average, and that completes our F1. Now, this is interesting for F2. I actually don't want to be using an indicator as default for this particular expert advisor. So of course, in our indicator library, we do have the option of using the NA indicator, which is as shown over here. Now, if we don't want to be using an indicator, that's what the expert advisor refers to as the NA indicator. So I'm going to copy that code, paste it in here, and that completes that code. So this just means that we don't want to be using an indicator for our filter F2, but the option is still there if the user wants to change that using the input functions within MetaTrader. Now, finally, this one is a little bit different. This is our exit indicator. And for this particular expert advisor, I want to have the exit indicator as the same indicator as our indicator F1. So that is going to be the 200 exponential moving average. So I want to be exiting trades when there is a crossover of the 200 exponential moving average in the opposite direction. So what I could do is copy this code and specify that I want to use the same indicator as F1, the exponential 200 moving average. However, another way that I could do this is actually just say that I want to specify that indicator X1 is equal to indicator F1. So I'll replace that code and make it into this. Now, because I have done this, this doesn't have to be an input variable. So I'm going to take away the input and I'm going to code it like so. Now, the reason why I've done this is if I want to keep the expert advisor signals consistent, where I want the trading strategy to exit on the same indicator as our F1 indicator above, then I want to code this within the expert advisor itself. In the event that the user might want to change the input of our exponential 200 moving average to, let's say, a different moving average, such as a 50 exponential moving average. That way, indicator X1 will automatically know that the indicator F1 has changed, so the indicator is going to be consistent. Of course, you can have what we had before, is to declare an input for this variable and have the user code their own indicator in here if you want to have an alternative exit indicator different to our F1 indicator. So the options there, that's where this code can be a little bit flexible. So now what we have done is we have set up our indicator section over here. One thing to note is that we do have indicator handles for each of the indicators that we are using, which are of course arrays. Now the reason why they're arrays is because of course we are using multi-symbol functionality. So what we need to do is resize these arrays to the number of tradable symbols that we are trading. This is very similar to resizing our core arrays, which is done in the onInit function. So if I go down to the onInit function, you'll see our resize core arrays here. We need to do something similar, and that is to resize our indicator arrays. So I've added this code, resize indicator arrays, which is going to be a custom function that we are going to have to code up in our custom functions area. I'm going to scroll down. And now that I'm in our indicator libraries custom functions, I'm going to create our new custom function, which is resize indicator arrays. Now the resize indicator arrays, if I go up a little bit, is very similar to our resize core arrays that we have used previously. Just looking here, resize core arrays and indicator arrays, I should delete that. And keep those separate. So what I've done here is resize indicator arrays, where we've got, of course, 4 indicator handles, 1 for each of our indicators, and we're resizing it to the number of tradable symbols. That way that we are storing the appropriate indicator handle for each one of the symbols that we are trading. Now scrolling back up to the onDinit function, you might recall that if you followed along from our multi-symbol expert advisor video, that when we create our handles, we do need to release them as well. So what I'm going to do is create a new custom function called release indicator handles. And of course, this is another custom function within our indicators area. So we're going to scroll back down. And back within our indicator library custom functions, we are going to create yet another custom function. So I've just added in this piece of code here, which is going to release our indicator handles. And notice here that we are using the multi-symbol for loop because we are going to have to release each of the indicators, in this case 4 indicators, from each of the symbols that we are trading. So it's going to loop through all the symbols and release each of the indicators, and then it's going to print out that their handles were successfully released. Now that we have set up our handles appropriately and resized them, we can now, of course, get our handles for each of the symbols on the expert's initialization function. So going back to the onInit function over here, I've created yet another custom function, and this one's called init indicator handles. And that is going to be yet another custom function that we're going to create in our indicator library custom functions area. But before I do that, I'm going to wrap this custom function in some error handling code. So this custom function init indicator handles is going to return a Boolean, so true or false. And so if this custom function, for whatever reason, does not return true, which means that our indicators were not successfully created, and that's declared by this exclamation mark, then if it doesn't return true, then we're going to return initialization failed. However, if we do successfully run the indicator handle setup, then of course that's going to pass and then return initialization succeeded. So we're going to go back down, and in our indicator library custom functions, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of that. And I'm going to create our final custom function. So I have just put in the following code, and this is again a Boolean for indicator handles. And this is going to run through the indicator multi-symbol for loop, of course, because we are going to create a handle for each of our indicators for each of our symbols that we are trading. So we're going to get the indicator handle E1 at position denoted by our symbol loop. That is going to be equal to our first function that we are going to be bringing in from our indicator library, and that is get indicator handle, of course. and we're going to be specifying the indicator string that we are using, which is indicator E1, the symbol array, symbol loop, which is going to return the symbol that we are trading, and then of course the period that we are trading. Now I just want to call out here that indicator E1, you might recall, is this input string indicator E1 here, which is of course our MACD A1226.9, which is the exact same variable that we need for our indicator library to process the appropriate functions. We got the same thing for our F1, get indicator handle for indicator F1, which is of course our exponential moving average 200. We're of course getting the symbol array, current symbol, and then the period. Same thing for F2, which is our NA indicator. And then finally, we've got our exit indicator, which is our indicator X1. Now, if all of that is ran successfully, then we return true. And so our initialization of our indicator handles is successful. Going to compile everything. Everything compiles, which is really good. And so that completes our setup of our initialization of our indicators. We've got our D in it also set up. So that means we need to go to our onTick function. Now within our onTick function, we have enough code in here to get our indicator signals. So if I scroll down to our template file, we've got the remaining bit of code in our Expert Advisor. The first thing that we're going to be doing is getting indicator signals, and that is done through coding up the following code. Our indicator signal E1, which we have declared in the global variables, is now passed through, and that is equal to get indicator trigger. And that is again another one of our custom functions from our indicator library. We are passing through indicator E1, which is again our MACD 1226.9 variable. We are then passing through our indicator handle E1, which we have just initialized, and that is for the particular symbol that we are currently on. So we are specifying the indicator handle for the symbol that we are using. We're also passing through the current symbol and then the period as well. Now for our indicator signal F1, we've got something similar. However, this time we are passing through get indicator filter. And the variables are very similar. In this instance, we're passing indicator F1, indicator handle F1 for the symbol loop, current symbol and period is the same. Very similar to indicator F2 and indicator X1. Notice here, however, that indicator X1, which is our exit, is a trigger function because of course we want to be exiting on the trigger event. So that's everything that we need to do to get our indicator signals. Now we can actually process the trades. So what we want to do when we are entering long. So for our long entries, I've added in a if statement. And if all of this is true, then we want to process the trades, which is again, very similar to what we have done in our multi-symbol code. So I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, and we're specifying that this is now position long. What I want to focus on, however, is the actual trade conditions themselves for our indicators. So of course, we want to be entering longs when our position direction is short. So we're in a short trade, or we're not in a trade at all. Basically, we don't want to be entering trades if our position direction is long. The next thing we want to do is, of course, have an AND condition where we also want to be looking at if indicator signals E1 is equal to long. So that is our MACD trigger in this example. And then finally, I've added in our two filters. So we also want to be looking for indicator filter 1 is equal to long, and our indicator filter 2 is equal to long. Now notice here, of course, that I've also added in the following code: indicator signal F1 is equal to MA, or indicator signal F2 is equal to NA. Now there's a reason why I've specified this OR statement in here, and that is because in the event of us using an NA indicator. Now, when we are using an NA indicator, the indicator is going to return, well, NA. And NA indicators, particularly for filters, is specified when we do not want to be using an indicator. Now, if the variable indicator filter F2 is always going to be returning NA, then indicator F2 will never equal to long. So if this code wasn't actually here, then the trading strategy would actually never take trades. So that means we want to make sure that we include an OR statement for our NA indicators as shown, so that way in the event that we are not using an indicator, i.e. the NA indicator, then we also want to be taking trades. So I'll just scroll across just so that you have the completed code here if you're following along. And that's our long entries completed. We can do something very similar for shorts. So for short trades, we have an else if. If everything within the if statement is true, then of course we're going to be entering shorts. Again, won't spend much time on this. I just want to call out, however, that order type is now sell instead of buy in the previous long signal, and position direction is of course short. We have here similar conditions where we only want to be entering short trades if we are already in a long trade or we're not in a trade at all. Of course, again, we don't want to be entering short trades when we're already in a short trade. Our indicator signal E1, which is our trigger, must equal to shorts. And our indicator signal F1 must equal to short, or again, our NA indicator. And our indicator signal F2 must equal to short or our NA indicator. And that is our shorts done. Now finally, for our exit trades, I've entered in the following code. And this is again another else if. If everything in this statement is true, then we're going to exit the trade using this custom function process trade close. And again, this is our custom function in our process trades area within our template file. What we want to do when we're exiting a trade is look for when our trade is in a long trade and our exit indicator says to go short. So we're getting a conflicting signal. That is an indication to exit the trade. Likewise, if our position direction is short and our exit indicator says go long, then that is another indication to exit the trade. And of course, we've got a OR function over here. And that is our exits completed. Now, last but not least, if you followed along from our multi-symbol functionality, you would know that we've got this update symbol metrics section over here. And this is where I like to put in our indicator conditions. So this is a good way for the user to know if the expert advisor is working well accordingly. And it's a good way to test your expert advisor. We'll see that working more clearly when we go into the EA testing itself. But what I'm going to do is add in some more pieces of code. So I'm going to add a plus symbol, make some space, and I've added in the following code, which I've highlighted here. Now this is going to add in comments for each of our 4 indicators as shown. What it's going to pass through for each of our indicators is the indicator handle reference number for the particular symbol that is being traded. And note that this is a integer, so we need to convert integer to string. So this is going to comment the indicator handle for this indicator on this symbol itself. And so this is a good way to check if your indicator handle is set up correctly. The next thing, of course, is going to pass through the indicator symbol. And I've done something very similar for the other 3 indicators, filter 1, filter 2, and exit as shown. I'm going to compile this, and that all compiles. And the very last thing that I want to do here is change our patch notes to patch notes 2. And so I'm just calling out here that we have successfully completed our expert advisor. And so I'm updating the patch notes to patch note 2, that this is the completed version from our YouTube tutorial. And so this will be available on our GitHub. I'm going to finally compile this, and that now completes our expert advisor. Well, it's all coming together now, isn't it? Our expert advisor is now completed, making reference to our indicator library. So that means we can actually test this out, and we can test it in, of course, MetaTrader itself. So this is where everything all comes together, and this is going to be a very exciting part of this tutorial. So let's go into MetaTrader and test out our very own indicator library and our expert advisor. So now in MetaTrader, what I have done is selected our multi-symbol indicator EA version 1.01. Now I've just got this on Euro USD on a daily time frame, and we have this, well, what was in there currently, which is 2016 to 2020. I am looking at open prices only, and I've disabled optimization, but what I'll do is enable visualization. Now, if I go to the input section, we can see here that we've got the unique ID. Of course, this is our magic number. We've got all tradable symbols. And as I mentioned before, you can type in current here and that will trade the current symbol only, which in this instance is Euro USD. I've got the lot size. Again, this is fixed lot size, so 0.1 we're starting off with. But here we can see our indicator functions themselves. Our entry indicator being our MACD for conditions A using a period of 12, 26, and 9. We've got our indicator F1, which is our exponential moving average on conditions A using a period of 200. And we don't have a filter 2, but we have the option for a filter 2. But considering that we're not using one, we're using the NA indicator as mentioned before. Now, this is all you need for this expert advisor to test this particular combination of indicators. So if I start this, good to see that our expert advisor does run. Oh, and we're already in a trade. I will just make that bigger. So we can see here that we have a exponential moving average. That's our 200. So that was created successfully. We also have our MACD, which is created successfully as well, just to test if the conditions are correct. We are entering short if our price is below the exponential moving average. That's our filter 1, so that's true. And it does look like we have had a crossover here. However, the crossover is relatively very minor, so it's kind of hard to see, but there is a crossover there. Just before we go into seeing how the trade actually performs, if I go into the journal, I just want to show you this. So we can see here the expert advisor has initialized correctly, but what I want to highlight here is this section here. So it does say that the EA will process one symbol. Of course, this is our exponential moving average. And we can see here that the EA will process our first indicator, which is our MACD for conditions A, using a period of 12, 26, and 9. And this, of course, has 5 parameters on Euro USD. So this is our indicator array within our indicator library, which appears to be processing correctly. And the handle for these parameters on this indicator and on this symbol was successfully created on Euro USD, and that's the handle ID of 10. Now, it's kind of hard to see, but that is what's shown here, our entry 1. In brackets, that is what is referred to as the handle. We've got the same thing for our filter 2. We've got EMA, conditions A, and 200, which has 3 parameters on Euro USD. Notice here that the parameters is also including the symbol and the conditions. So this is basically the array size, not the actual parameters itself on the indicator, because EMA has only 1 parameter. So just one thing to call out. And we can see here that we have called the handle successfully, and this is handle ID 11, which we can see for filter 1, it equals to 11. We've got the same thing for our NA indicator, and that is handle 0. Again, we're not using anything there. And one thing to call out here is that for our exit indicator, which is shown here, our handle is actually exactly the same as our filter 1, of course, because we're using the same parameters and the same indicator. So it is referring to the exact same handle ID as what was created in our previous filter 1, which is shown here. So it's good to double check to make sure that your code is working correctly for your expert advisor, and of course your indicator library, which you can use this comment section over here to validate your work. So out of curiosity, let's see how this trading strategy actually performs using a couple of tests. So of course we've entered short. Let's see if it will exit the trade on our exit indicator. And well, look, it did. That's good. So we did enter short, but we have exited here. It's not really the best exit strategy because of course the 200 moving average is very far away from price when we do enter. And if price is far away from our EMA when we do enter, well then our EMA has to catch up before our exit to be actually profitable. So not really the best exit indicator, something that we can definitely optimize. Just to call out here that there was a bearish crossover where the MACD did cross above the 0 line. However, price was above the exponential moving average. So they were conflicting signals. So we didn't take a trade. See if we get another example. Okay, we've had one example here. So price is above the EMA. And this is a long trade because the MACD did cross below the 0 line. And that did enter into a loss. Maybe one more example. Oh, well, there was one here, but price just hovered over the moving average, so it entered and then exit straight away. There's another loss as well. Maybe we can get a better example. There we go. So we've had a bearish crossover. Cross has happened above the 0 line and price is below the exponential moving average. So let's see if we can get a profitable trade. Doesn't look like it. And we're exiting at another loss. Now, it doesn't look promising, this trading strategy, unfortunately. If I close this, we can of course test this using MetaTrader. So what I'm going to do is all tradable symbols. Instead of current, I'm going to put in 28 currency pairs. I'm going to turn visualization off just because we don't need to see it. And what we're going to do is do a back test. So unfortunately, with the couple of trades that we did do, it didn't look too promising. However, it was only a couple of trades. Let's see what it does. Oh, goodness. For 28 currency pairs over 4 years, and well, it didn't do too well. We can see here that our trading strategy lost $22,000. Our profitable trades was less than 20%. And also our holding position was 813 hours. So converting that to days, that is 33 or 34 days holding time. So not really, it's kind of okay considering that this is more of a trend following swing trade type of trading strategy. So it's not too bad. However, it's still not looking that promising. So unfortunately, our expert advisor doesn't really do too well with the current trading strategy conditions or indicator conditions that we have coded up. Now, I did mention, of course, that the exit conditions of our expert advisor isn't that optimal. The 200 exponential moving average is not, well, the best exit. And we also don't have take profit or stop losses, which might also assist with our little problem that we have around exiting the trades. However, I'll leave that up to you to play around with. What I do want to spend some time on in this video is actually seeing what happens if we take opposite signals. Now, you would have seen at the start of our testing on those, well, couple of examples that we did have, that taking the opposite trade might have actually been a little bit more rewarding. And this is also a video that I've done some time ago, actually, where I tested this out in TradingView. However, this didn't take into account trading commissions and the like. So I do want to test this out within MetaTrader, and what better way to test this out than coding in some alternative conditions within our indicator library. See what I did there? So we're going to go back into MetaEditor, into our indicator library, and code up some different conditions for our MACD and our exponential moving average. Now within our indicator library section, if I scroll down to our library contents, we're going to see that we have our two indicators. We've got our exponential moving average and our MACD. Now, of course, in the example, we have shown that we want to see what occurs when we take opposite trading conditions. So opposite to what we have coded up in trading conditions A for both the MACD and the EMA respectively. Now we could go into the code and of course change the trading conditions for conditions A to the appropriate trading conditions that we want to test out. However, that is not the intent of this library. We want to have the option to be able to change between conditions A and conditions B So we're going to add in, of course, well, what I've just mentioned, another condition, which is, you might have guessed it, B. So I've added in conditions B for each of the trading indicators that are in here currently. And so, of course, we'll need to code them up. Now, one thing to call out here is that when changing indicator conditions, we don't need to change the handles themselves. So everything in the setup indicator handles remains unchanged, as the setup of these handles are not reliant on the conditions. So we'll skip through all of that and we'll just work our way down. So starting off at indicator trigger signals, our first trigger is going to be our moving average. Now you'll see here that our indicator conditions for our moving average, denoted by conditions A, is price crosses above the moving average, we're going to go long, or if price crosses below the moving average, we're going short. And of course, we want to test what happens when the opposite occurs. So I'm copying that piece of code, I'm pasting it, I'm going to call this conditions B, and I'm going to do the opposite signals. So basically I'm changing longs to short and shorts to long. So with the opposite conditions, I am now suggesting that price crosses above the moving average, we go short, or price crosses below the moving average, we go long. And this works perfectly for our exit indicator in this context that we're going to explore. Now we of course have to code that up. So everything in terms of the actual indicator variables that we are defining here remains unchanged. We go to the indicator condition sections, and this is where we're going to spend a little bit of time. Of course, here we've got our conditions A. I want to add in another section called conditions B just below. And again, we're going to be using the exact same conditions as specified above, however, taking the opposite signal. So I'm going to copy this code. I'm going to paste this below. And so I've pasted this code over here, but I'm going to change the code. Instead of conditions A, we're going conditions B. Instead of long, we're going short. And instead of short, we're going long. And that is how easy that is. I'm going to compile. That compiles with no errors, a couple of warnings, but as mentioned, that's okay. And we can move on to the next indicator. So under oscillators, we have our MACD. Again, I'm going to do something very similar. I'm going to copy this code. I'm going to paste in that code. I'm going to change this now to conditions B. So we're going to be looking for the MACD and signal line crossover, and that crossover occurs below the 0 line. We're not going long, we're going short this time. And likewise, when we were going short before, we are now going long. So again, I'm going to copy that code. Nothing in here has to change until we get to our conditions section. We've got conditions A here. I'm going to add in now a conditions B section as shown. And like previous, I'm going to copy the code that we have just done above, paste that below, and change the variables. We're going to look for conditions B now. We're going to be changing our longs to short, short to long, compile. That compiles good. So we go on to the next one. Now we're now up to our indicator filters section. And within our indicators filter section, we've got our trend following indicators, which is now, again, our exponential moving average, but we are changing the conditions. So I'm copying that code. I'm now looking for, when we select conditions B, price is above the moving average, so we're going short. And when price is below the moving average, we're going long. And now this is very useful if you are looking to do any mean reversion trading strategies, which this trading strategy that we are doing now is actually a mean reversion one, because we are taking opposite signals opposing the trend. So I'm going to copy this. Again, scrolling down to our conditions section. Under conditions A, I'm pasting the following code for conditions B. Copying the code that we did above. Pasting that. We're now changing this to conditions B, conditions short, conditions long, compile, and that compiles. Now I'm scrolling down. And that looks like that's everything, and we're not changing anything in our get indicator function here just yet. So everything compiles and that's working well. One thing I just want to mention is that whenever you're making changes to your indicator library, you do need to go back to your expert advisor and compile this as well. That makes sure that when you go back into MetaTrader, that your indicator library, which you have just changed and compiled, is reflected in your expert advisor that you are testing. So you need to make sure that you are compiling this as well. Now, one thing, of course, that I didn't do, but is definitely required, is updating our patch notes now that we have completed our indicator library for this tutorial. So we're updating to patch notes 2. Compile, that compiles. Well, we've coded up our alternative conditions in our indicator library, and notice here the beauty that we don't have to actually code up a whole nother expert advisor. We just need to change the code within our indicator library. So with our updated code in our indicator library and with no changes to our expert advisor, let's go back into MetaTrader and test out these new indicator conditions within MetaTrader. So now back in MetaTrader, again with our expert advisor selected, I'm going to go into the input section and I'm going to change this code back to current. And instead of now using MACD indicator A conditions, I'm going to use MACD indicator B conditions. And same thing with exponential moving average. Now, what I'm going to do is quickly go into the settings and turn visualization on, and we can see if we are taking now opposite signals. So there we go. And you might recall that we did have a trade straight away. Now we are taking opposite trades. So instead of going short, we're actually going long. So this is a mean reversion type of strategy. And we can see here now that that was a profitable trade, which previously it was a loss. We can keep going. So there we go. So previously, when there was a MACD crossover under the zero line, that was a long trade. Now we are actually going short. Price is above the exponential moving average. That was previously long. Now we're going short. And we can see there now that is a profitable trade. And we can keep going, but that looks like that everything is working. So I'm going to close that. I'm going to add in the symbols. So all 28 symbols. And I just want to show you again what this trading strategy did before. You might recall turning off optimization. Let's see if going the opposite way that the herd is going actually does anything better. So this is the original signal. So going with the herd. And you will recall that that is not good. I just want to see what the net profit was, and that was $22,000. So we have lost $22,000 by following what, well, everyone else is doing. So let's see what going the other way does. And it does the opposite. Well, have you look at that. So we can see here that we have now gained $10,000. Now, of course, previously we have lost $22,000. Taking the opposite signals, we're not going to get a gain of $22,000. That is because we have trading fees taken into consideration. However, we are still at a profit. However, there are some things that are still exactly the opposite. Before we had around about 20% profitable trades. That is now 75%. So we have now got more profitable trades. Our holding time is still exactly the same as previously. So now that this is a mean reversion strategy, this is definitely not optimal. You don't want to be holding a mean reversion strategy for, well, 30 days. So that's something that needs to be optimized. And then finally, I just want to highlight, which I didn't before, The number of symbols being traded is 28, so we know our multi-symbol functionality is working. So that does conclude our tutorial today in coding up your very own expert advisor and indicator library. And hopefully you were able to follow along and get similar results as to what we have in this tutorial. If you have been able to follow along, then a very huge congratulations, because you are now in a very good position to code up your very own indicators within your indicator library. Now, as a little bit of a bonus for those people that were able to follow along in this tutorial and spend probably a few hours going through and creating their code, or for those people as well that have skipped all of that and come straight to this point as well. Can't do much about that. But anyway, here's a little bit of a bonus and a head start on adding in indicators in your very own indicator library. So back into MetaEditor, and in our indicator library, we can see here patch notes 3, which says that we have added in further indicators into this library. See library contents. So this is the library contents, and you will see that there is quite a number of indicators added to the library. For example, we not only have just the exponential moving average, but we have more moving averages under our trend following indicators. We have the RSI. We also have a Bollinger Band indicator within this indicator library, noting here that I've also included this number of closes parameter within the library, which I'll let you explore. We've got, of course, the ATR, and we've also got here a custom indicator called ADMA, which I have included in here to show you how to include custom indicators within the indicator library as well. We've got the MACD, of course, and some other indicators down below. So this is the accumulation distribution moving average, ADMA is what I have referenced to. And this shows you exactly how to include custom indicators in the indicator library using the iCustom function. Now, this particular indicator is mapped to the following location. So what I'm going to do is include this custom indicator in my GitHub as well. And that way you can download this indicator and map it to your particular location that you want. And if you don't know how to do that, there is plenty of videos on YouTube or within the MQL forums for you to go do that. Now scrolling to the very bottom, this is something again that we haven't really spent any time on in this video, but we have mentioned it. And that is this get indicator value function. Now this get indicator value function is going to be extremely useful when using, for example, the average true range or ATR. Now you might be using the ATR to do some volatility adjustment money management. So you'll need to get the ATR value to do your money management, which is essentially what this function does. All you need to do is include this function within your expert advisor, which in this tutorial we did. And all you need to do is pass in the indicator handle and the buffer value of that indicator that you want to include. So for example, if you want to get the value of the ATR, you would need to have included the ATR in your indicator handles functions, which is what we've done today for our MACD and exponential moving average. But you'll need to do the same with the ATR and create a handle and then pass through that handle into this function, as well as specify the buffer value that you want to return. With the ATR, for example, there's only one buffer, so that is buffer position 0. And then the function is going to run and return the get indicator value or the ATR value back to the expert advisor. So going back into MetaTrader, this is where we left off. We have our expert advisor, which is of course version 1.02. And we have here our trading strategy for the indicators that we have selected, our MACD and our exponential moving average. But let's say I want to test another trading strategy. I want to test a Bollinger Band trading strategy. So all I need to do is remove this, add in the code like so. And maybe I want to not use an exponential moving average, but I want to use a simple moving average instead, which is again what we have added to the indicator library. Now, just to explain this trading strategy, we're using, of course, our Bollinger Band for our entry conditions. So that's denoted by BB. We're using conditions B, which I'll leave it up to you to have a look in the indicator library to see what those conditions are. We've got here a Bollinger Band period of 10, a standard deviation of 1, and then here finally we have a custom parameter which I have included, which essentially just looks for the number of consecutive closes above the Bollinger Band or lower Bollinger Bands for us to enter a trade. The next thing is our SMA. Again, I'll leave it up to you to look at the conditions. However, this is very similar to our exponential moving average. And here we've got a 10 simple moving average, and this is to reflect the exact same parameters as our Bollinger Band. So I'm going to go in, start the Expert Advisor, and just like that, we have our Expert Advisor now using the Bollinger Band. So we can see here that we have entered a trade. We've got our Bollinger Band over here. We've got also our simple moving average in red, but this is also the center line of our Bollinger Band trading strategy. We can see here that prices closed below the Bollinger Band. However, we're looking for 2 consecutive candle closes below the Bollinger Band for us to enter. So there's 1 candle, 2 candles. So then on the next candle, we have confirmed the trading conditions. So we are entering a long trade. And so this is a mean reversion trading strategy. And because of our EA's trading conditions, we are also looking to exit on our second filter, which is the simple moving average, so the center line. So we can see here that we have entered a trade and closed the trade using our appropriate conditions. So that is the end of today's tutorial. There is quite a lot there to unpack, quite a lot there for you, no doubt, to work on, but I hope it gives you a little bit of insight in terms of what is possible within MetaTrader, particularly within libraries. Now, this is something that I've been working on for the past couple of months, and something that has taken even longer to put into a format that can be done in a tutorial as quickly and concisely as I possibly can, even though it's probably going to be 2 hours. However, saying that, I'd be hugely appreciative if you're able to like this video and comment in the comment section below what you found most interesting or what you might be using this indicator library for. And of course, consider subscribing to the channel if you want to keep up to date with some future tutorial and videos and what's happening, well, in my algorithmic trading, quantitative trading space. So with all that being said, thanks for following along. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you got some value out of this, and I will see you in the next video.